Hello everyone. Once again, I'm here with another webinar series for the entrepreneurs on behalf of Wadhwani Foundation, National Entrepreneurship Network. WFNEN is doing a phenomenal job in supporting startups, early stage and growth stage entrepreneurs and SMEs to grow their business. Entrepreneurs need mentors to scale their business to the next level, and WFNEN provides such mentoring and learning platform for free to those who come and register at wfnen.org. The mechanism is a very straightforward approach, goal-based, time-bound, and structured mentoring. Enrich yourself connecting to 400 plus mentors from various fields of work and make a difference. As we begin, I am so pleased to be with you and to have the chance to introduce our speaker, Ajeet Khurana, a renowned name in the startup world. Ajeet is an author, angel investor, mentor, TEDx speaker, steering committee of the NASSCOM Startup Warehouse, ex-advisor to Calorie Capital, and former CEO of IIT Bombay's Business Incubator, among others. Recently, he was also part of the team that created the TV show The Wall. Before all this, he was entrepreneur twice in the field of education and web publishing. As a lecturer at the University of Texas at Austin, he taught e-commerce back in 1993 when the term e-commerce had not yet been coined. From starting two ventures as a solopreneur to helping a large number of startups with their go-to-market, he has never shied from getting his hands dirty. At the same time, he has helped dozens of startups raise investment. He truly believes that small business owners are driving change in the world and need to be facilitated as much as possible. Innumerable small businesses have gained from his attitude, vast professional networks, financial acumen, and digital mindset. Before we begin, we will be recording today's webinar and you'll be able to access the slides and video within 24 hours after the webinar concludes on our website www.wfnen.org. If you have questions about today's content, feel free to ask them in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We will answer them live in our Q&A session. I would love to hear your feedback on today's session. Your input and suggestions for future sessions are invaluable to me. So please leave your feedback on the poll. Have a great session. Over to you, Ajeet. All the best.
Thank you very much. It's a delight being present here with everybody. I can see that we have like a couple of dozen to 2-3 dozen people online already. So for those of you who are well versed with how this works, you will see that on the right side you can probably access the chat option. So I'm just send a couple of chats out so we know that you are totally engaged with us. In any case, I'm about to start talking about the topic for today, and that is this: what you don't know about the way VCs think. Now, this topic is probably a little gimmicky because how do I know what you know and what you don't know? But the intent behind this topic was that we have all heard the usual things that people tell us. We have all heard about what people say VCs want or what they don't want, etc. But what tends to happen is that if VCs operate in the way we think that they do, then why is it that they don't give you money? Clearly, there is something limited or limiting in your thinking which is stopping them from funding you, and those are some of the things that we will explore in today's topic. My session is going to be actually pretty simple. I'm going to show you all my slides in the next 1 minute, then come back and go down slide by slide so you can prepare, because this entire session is going to be about half an hour long, followed by about 20-25 minutes of Q&A. So that is an investment of close to an hour by the people who are online, which I think is a very substantial investment of time. And since you are going to participate with that much time, it is only reasonable if I tell you what it is that you are in for, and then you can plan the rest of your hour that way. So I'm going to talk to you about how to view funding, okay, and why some of us who might be in very early stages or just might be aspiring for funding may actually be thinking of this all wrong. I will talk to you about how, pretty much like you treat customers who buy your goods or services, you should be treating your investors the same way, because they also buy your shares, and to that extent they are your customers. I will tell you about thinking like the investor. Like, so you are thinking about what you want and what the investor can give you, but what does the investor want? How do you think about that? And only when you appreciate the thinking of the investor will you actually be able to make sense to them when you talk to them. Of course, we have heard of things like team, market size, traction, and some of the other usual things. What else do VCs care for that we are missing? And that's it. Then we move to Q&A. So with this basic framework in mind, let me just give you one little disclaimer and then begin talking about the first topic at hand. The disclaimer is that I do not believe that funding from a venture capitalist or otherwise, I do not believe that funding is what entrepreneurship is about. I do not think that the success or failure of a venture or an entrepreneur is directly correlated or should directly be correlated with whether they are able to raise funding. If some of you are going to be entrepreneurs only if you manage to raise funding, I frankly don't appreciate that way of thinking. And I believe that you should be able to create value which goes beyond whether an investor comes in or not. I do think that investment and investors play a good role, and that is in terms of scaling things, in terms of enabling things which might not have been possible without money. But it does pain me when I see entrepreneurs largely think that entrepreneurship is equal to funding and funding is equal to entrepreneurship, and neither do I subscribe to it, nor do I forgive it. And definitely that is not the objective of this webinar. So you want to think hard about how it is that you view funding, how it is that you view your roadmap, the milestones that your organization will have when you are going through this entire journey. And there better be many more things other than funding. Having put those disclaimers and initial thoughts in place, let's move ahead to this. Those of you who can see the screen, let me tell you what this is about. Often what I feel is that when entrepreneurs go and talk to investors, and let us say things either don't work out or the entrepreneur doesn't know whether or not they'll work out, they feel a little disappointed. They feel, I have done so much, I have achieved so much, I have developed this great product, service, or offering, I have gone ahead and got some customers, I'm doing some things which either nobody in the world is doing, or at least I'm doing them in a way which is somewhat unique. Why is it that this guy, the investor, is not appreciating that? I can understand the frustration. I have been with many entrepreneurs who have expressed that frustration. The point is that this is not a competition. Maybe you did something which was phenomenally creative and innovative. This was not a competition about whether you were creative or innovative or not. This was not a competition about seeing who worked the hardest. While creativity, innovation, and other such factors might be important. In fact, they might be critically important to the success of a venture. Merely the presence of these factors does not mean the investor is interested. Please understand the word investor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly just move to my webcam so that you can look at my face and I can expressively tell you what it is that we are talking about here. Please understand that what we are talking about is investors. And what is an investor? An investor is somebody who invests to make more money. Now, you may, for instance, do the most stupid business in the world, the most ordinary business in the world, but an investor feel that you are going to make money, that is good enough for me because my job. See, I'm not a government promoting entrepreneurship. I think VCs entrepreneurship, but because of money in the system. My job is, I'm not your friend that I will motivate you and say, oh, my child, you've done such a great job. Probably VCs motivate as well as demotivate entrepreneurs, but that neither of those are objectives. They just happen along the path. The key, the primary thing here to understand is that VCs are in this business to make money. VCs are venture capitalists. They are investors because they want to make money. And as a result, as I showed you in this slide, this is not evaluating you as a person, your hard work, your whatever. It is only evaluating whether by putting in 100 rupees into your company, the investor will make 200 rupees or a certain multiple of that. If you can keep this in mind, you will probably be 20 VCs. It is not as if all 20 will necessarily say yes or all 20 will necessarily say no. There are obviously situations where people get rejected by a bunch of VCs and then somebody goes and invests in them. Some VCs that they find you suitable, It is not that some are more or less intelligent, or the more intelligent guy invested in you, or shudder, the less intelligent guy invested in you. It is to do with, what works for this VC. So I have friends who have set up funds where they primarily want to focus on consumer products, consumer goods company, consumer brands. I have others who will not even touch a business to invest on B2B clients, enterprise software. There are some who are happy with businesses that deal with the domestic market, and some others who say, no, we want to address the global or the United States audience. So it varies. Everybody has a different cup of tea. You go to a tea shop today, there are like 20 varieties of tea, where everything is a tea. So when it comes to investment, I'm sure that you can understand why. Everybody has their own thinking. What you have to do is you have to find out why it is that you think it is suitable for them to invest in. And I must also tell you this. I get pretty unhappy when I see that entrepreneurs keep changing their business, not just their PowerPoint decks, but they actually change their business based on what they think that an investor will want to buy. Actually, that is pretty silly, isn't it? As in, maybe in an extreme case, by constantly changing and evolving yourself in becoming a fundable business will cause you to get funded. But what is the business that you wanted to do? What is the business that you believe is going to do well? Is that solely going to be based on how you're going to sell? Like I said, this is not a competition. Do not treat it as a running race. Treat it as taking off. There are so many things. You hire employees. You create a product. Think of funding as one of the many things that you do. Of course, it's a very important point for most companies that choose to take funding, but don't let it become the only point. Moving ahead, do not treat your investors or prospective investors either as your boss or as your enemy, or as if they are the government of India, or as if they are your parents. Please understand that you're selling something to them. You are selling to them a share of your company. You are selling your equity shares to them. You are selling to them the opportunity to be a part of your journey. And if this is how you view it, then you will notice that, hey, investors are actually customers. You might be producing biscuits and selling to your customers, right? So people who take those biscuits are your customers. You might be making software. You might be providing certain human resource services, or whatever it is that you are doing. You sell it to people who buy it, thereby they become your customers. Now, why are people who are buying your shares or the opportunity to invest in you not your customers? I pretty much see, if you can see the slide, there's this guy who's selling, I think, dates or other dried fruit to this customer. That is it. You are the seller, they are the buyer. When they buy something from you, they have a certain expectation of the value they are going to get. Like, for example, this guy on the screen with the red and white turban is hoping that he will either probably eat this fruit and gain something out of it, or maybe he'll use this fruit for some commercial purpose and make money out of it. You have to understand what is the objective of the person who is buying from you, and then decide whether you can meet it and how can you meet it. Let me take this further. What does the customer want? Depending on what you are selling them, the customer might have different objectives. So let us consider this unique and special case of the investor who is your customer and is buying your equity. What does your investor want? I think that goes without saying that in the long run, at the end of the exercise, the investor wants that whatever shares that they purchase in your company should be sold for a price significantly and distinctly higher than what they paid for it. Can you show me the path to which I will have to travel to make that? Can you show me why you think that your shares are going to be worth a lot tomorrow? What will decide the share price? Maybe your revenues, profits, maybe the number of people who use your platform, maybe the number of transactions, maybe the number of repeat purchases, maybe the very efficient mechanism you have set up for acquiring customers at a very economical model and price. I do not know. These could be some of them, and there could be other factors. Maybe the relationships you have, maybe the fact that you've already traveled a huge journey and established some sort of a competitive advantage. There could be various things where you could say, you know what, these are our strengths, and based on this, I think that we will be moving in this direction, thereby become very valuable to somebody who wants to buy our shares tomorrow. So if you buy my shares today, Tomorrow somebody will be willing and happy to buy it at a substantially higher price. That is a very simple proposition that you can present to people who want to play the game. Clear? That's it. I mean, it really gets down to that. Now, it is up to the investor to take the risk of whether or not they want to, to assume that the roadmap that you charted out will actually result in the consequences of shares being sold at a higher price. Yeah, see, they are willing to take the risk. In fact, they are in the business of taking the risk. But to begin with, it has to sound like a valuable proposition. Now, unlike those points that I listed where I talked of revenues and profits and usage and transactions and low customer acquisition costs and what have you, I find that especially seed and very early stage entrepreneurs would be happy if investors would listen to their idea. That, hey, listen, I have such a cool idea. Don't you think this is fundable? Well, idea stage funding do happen, but it's more suitable for going to incubators, or if you have done something already, business accelerators or seed investors. There are very few of those, but there are some. I think that may be more suitable for that category as opposed to venture capitalists. But if I don't distinguish between all of these and say basically people who will buy your shares and give you money, I believe that what you have to keep in mind is that, sure, your idea might be great, but merely a good idea has never resulted in a successful venture. Just let's take the case of, the hundreds, dozens, or maybe, well, hundreds of people who set up e-commerce websites around the same time in the same 1 or 2 year period when Flipkart, Snapdeal, Yepme, Yebi, Traders, God knows what else had started. So why is it that some of them succeeded and some of them did not? Some of them became like phenomenal, some others did not. The idea was structurally, at least at a macro level, similar. Yes, at the micro level, the idea might have been different. It might be a situation that somebody implemented the idea better, and that is the proof of the pudding. Personally, when people come to me and say, hey, this is my idea, what do you think I should do? I'm like, honestly, I like all ideas, but I do not have enough trust in my own ability to develop such a high confidence in those ideas that I would probably be able to put some money in it or even spend a lot of time on it. Why do I say that? Because frankly, ideas do matter. A great idea is indeed a great idea, but execution is everything. Because today you start with a great idea, tomorrow somebody can copy that idea. Even if you have patented it and copyrighted it or whatever, somebody could have a variation of that or a substitute for that or an improvement of that and come up with a similar offering. So the idea could be similar, but if you can go out and execute this well, if you can go out and make few bad decisions and lots of good decisions, if you can go out and get good partnerships in place, which includes partnerships with investors, I think that is when the business starts looking fundable. Of course, this doesn't mean that issues such as what is the market you are addressing, what is the size of the market, etc., doesn't matter, and it's only an execution play. For instance, some businesses could be non-fundable in the venture capital model, which does not mean, see, there are various forms of investments. Today, the fact that I'm focusing on venture capital kind of investments does not mean that is the only type of investment available. Your uncle could give you money to set up a restaurant in your neighborhood, right? That is not venture capital. You will probably give your uncle a certain percentage of your daily collections. That is not how venture capitalist makes model, but it is a very valid model of raising capital and going ahead and running a business. So don't get caught up on what a venture capitalist wants. You run the business the way you want it. Of course, you could make some minor tweaks if good suggestions come your way, even major tweaks for that matter, if good suggestions come your way, but not solely so that a venture capitalist invests in you. And this takes me to the next part, which is, let us assume that a venture capitalist or some equity investor has bought your shares. What happens next? Where do we go from here? What happens to that investor? And it is only when you will start appreciating the journey of your investor will you start making that decision in the first place. It is only when you know how your customer, and here I am not distinguishing between customer and investor, because as I showed you 2 slides ago, or rather right here, that your investors are your customers in a sense because they buy your equity. It is only when you realize how it is that your customers think and what it is that they want to do with what they buy from you and what their aspirations are, will you be able to be a good seller. In this case, selling of stake in your company. Let us try to understand. Let us assume, I'm a venture capitalist, which by the way is not really true. I have made angel investments in the past. There was a time when I was a very active angel investor, which again is no longer the case. But let us assume for a second I am a VC and I'm going ahead and making an investment in your company. What am I hoping will happen? Think of it, though, if we got really to splitting hair, I'm sure we could come up with 20 answers. But there are only 3 fundamental answers to how does a VC make money. The VC makes money by selling your shares. This happens in usually one of 3 ways. Either there are later VCs or later investors who buy shares from the company, and they also buy shares from the earlier investor. So this is called a secondary sale, namely earlier investors selling to later investors. Whether we like it or not, this is one of the most common forms of exit. Exit is a situation where a VC sells the shares that they purchased in a company. The second form of exit, and there are a total of 3, is when there is an acquisition, either wholly or partly, where, let us say, another company who is in the same space or adjacent space or otherwise finds it valuable to take a stake in you, comes and buys your company. At that point, they buy the company, they buy the shares that you hold, they buy the shares that your investors hold. Now, this may be structured differently. They may or may not buy all these shares, but the idea is they're trying to acquire your company. In some other cases, merge their company with yours. So this is a second form of exit. I told you there are 3 fundamental forms of exit. One is a secondary sale, namely earlier investors selling to later investors. The second, which I just told you about, was a situation where there's an M&A, that's merger or acquisition. And the third is where you take your company IPO. Namely, the public comes and buys shares. It is similar to selling to other later investors, but generally the IPO is the ultimate hope that a lot of investors have, because the price that you can get from an IPO are very attractive. Also, if a company has reached a point where an IPO is possible in the main market, so this is what an investor wants. Yes, of this relatively early stage, seed stage, idea stage, business plan stage, relatively earlier entrepreneurs who are at a very early stage of their entrepreneurial journey. If that is the case, you have to realize that you have to appreciate that the investor has jumped in before a lot of things have been proven to be right. One of the fundamental ones is your ability to go very, very hard, very, very that to have rate. Because venture capitalists push us a few tens of thousands, $100 of your money, and all these amounts that are listed as small amounts. Their period of time after that, short period could be 12 to 36 months. The growth that you will encounter based on the small amount of money they give you, almost a volume growth. And there'll be a very significant growth at 10x, 20x, 100x kind of growth in your fundamental metric, which could be revenue, profit, you download, track, you control your business model. Does your the ability to grow at that pace? And if you grow at that pace, what does it do? You still manage your required the business. The reverse happens. Things just absolutely when it moves fast, its outcomes tend to be. So suppose control of where their cash is going, they lose control big time. Some of their brand starts growing to become because starts hearing of them. So whether it's a positive outcome or a negative outcome, the money that the venture capital for your vehicle, namely just causes you to accelerate very, very fast. Now, when we say accelerate, the word accelerate usually is a positive word, but I have seen that acceleration can happen in any direction, right? That means you can accelerate down the hole and kill your company. You can accelerate all your mistakes and just not be a feasible company, or of course, the desirable outcome that you can accelerate the growth, the brand salience, the customers, the transactions, the revenue, the profit. You can accelerate all of those and of course move to a higher level. But the important point is, are you mentally ready for that kind of a commitment? Because indeed it is a commitment, right? You took money from the venture capitalists. It was not easy for them to bring you that money. They are not, the picture of a venture capitalist who is rolling around in money and can throw money wherever he or she likes and is not responsible or answerable to anybody is a very, very artificial picture. Venture capitalists take money from their own investors, pretty much like you, pretty much like the VC is an investor to you. The VCs themselves take money from their investors, who are called limited partners or LPs for short, and they're very answerable. The kind of returns, you could say astronomical returns that VCs expect from you, trust me, that fairly steep and astronomical returns are expected from VCs themselves by people who invested in them. So that is the journey you are committing to take. This is very important to understand. A lot of people, once they raise money from VCs for all the right reasons or the wrong reasons or whatever reasons, once they raise money from the VC, what tends to happen is that they don't know what hit them. It almost becomes like, it has become a slippery slope where they're going from one part to the other part and things are happening too fast, and there could sometimes be a sense of loss of control. There could be a situation where it is not just a sense of loss of control, there may actually be a lack of control, and this is where a lot of people blame VCs for coming in and killing the companies. I think that while it is true that a presence of an equity investor who is trying to accelerate your business at a very high pace could end up also accelerating the death of the company, the demise of the company, the fact is that that is the game you chose to play. So if you are playing a game where you're taking growth capital, where you're taking rocket fuel into your car, then you don't talk about why your car is driving so fast. You chose to put rocket fuel inside. Namely, you are committing, not just choosing, you're committing to grow your company at a very high speed. And when you grow something at a very high speed, the risk of the company tends to increase, at least in the near term. My opinion is that companies who take equity funding do become a little more risky in the short term because the requirements of high growth just come as an additional requirement on their shoulder. Having said that, I do not say this in the negative sense necessarily. So I'm not necessarily saying that, hey, don't take venture capital. Sure, if the pressure of rapid growth seems like something you don't want to take on your shoulders, then do not take venture capital. I agree. But if you think that that is a kind of pressure, commitment, and deliverable that you are comfortable with, then venture capital might be for you. This takes us to almost the last part of today's session. The time now is, we are about 25 minutes into the session. In another 5 to 10 minutes, I will try to conclude this because I want to make myself available for answering specific questions that you have. So please keep preparing your questions. There's a little chat box on the control panel that you would have on your right side. If you do not know what this control panel is all about, probably you will have an orange arrow on near the top right of your screen. You might want to pull it out if the control panel has collapsed, and you will notice something called chat. Click on it and leave your question. You can keep sending in your questions right now so that the people who are moderating and organizing this seminar are going ahead and reading them up and prioritizing them, because there's a good chance that we may not be able to address all the questions that come up. So please keep throwing your questions in as we go along, and my organizers will choose some of them, present it to me, and I will try to respond to the best of my ability. I'm keeping a solid 20 to 25 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes for Q&A, because I want to take as many of your questions as possible. However, let me move to the last big point that I wanted to talk about. If you have attended events on funding, if you have read articles, watched videos, you know that the usual suspects we talk about are things like how good is the team, what is the size of the market that you're addressing, what is your present traction. So these are usually the things that we hear about, and I think every one of them is absolutely right. However, there are some other things that you may not hear about as much. And which is what I want to bring to your notice, because sometimes you may think my team is so good and my market size, addressable market size is so great, my traction is reasonable and if not impressive, then why am I not able to attract investors? Well, first, your belief about the fact that the team, market size, traction, etc. is good may be misplaced, or at least the investor may have a different point of view. But more than that, there might be some other factors that you do not get. Let's try to understand those. If you think about what I told you here and here, namely, what is it that investors do? What they do is that they buy your shares and at a later stage sell it to somebody else. Whether the somebody else is a later investor, whether it is the public in an IPO mechanism, or whether it is an acquirer or somebody who wants to merge with you, basically they get rid of their shares at a price which they hope is substantially higher than the price they paid for it. Now, if that is the case, what are the other factors that investors would look for? One is that the capitalists as well as other equity investors, especially if they for time. So some VCs would find that they may be able to sell a very deep core tech-based, deep technical intellectual property, and probably because they have buyers or relationships or a history of transaction. So this sort of VC might be more interested in that. Another VC could probably be investing into consumer goods, consumer brands, companies, product managers, the category leaders, etc., to acquire those brands. Still, others might be very happy to help themselves, and hence you get capitalist comes with a little different background. Hence, there is a different sweet spot. So one of the easiest way to try to get some sort of an idea about what their sweet spot is to look at the portfolio of companies that they have and ideally focus on their most recent transactions, because the sweet spot of investors also could keep evolving and changing. So look at the buckets that they have been investing in, and that is what I think you should target VCs who seem to be targeting spaces similar to yours. Now, please understand, spaces similar to yours does not mean companies identical to yours. In fact, it may be that in most cases, VCs do not invest in companies that are competitive with their earlier investment companies. And there are some exceptions to this. Let me not get into those advanced topics, but largely it is expected that a VC would not invest in a company where they have a conflict of interest or a similar company that they're banking upon, because some bad outcomes could occur or some discomfort could occur. But let me not get into the technicalities of that. In light of that, you do not want to go to somebody who invested in your direct competitor. Of course, if you're at a much later stage, you're Ola cab and Uber, various things could happen. If you're a Flipkart or a Snapdeal, some things could happen. But since we are talking of very early stage venture capital and equity investment in this webinar, probably the investor, the venture capitalist investor, and this may not be true about angel investors, but the venture capital investor who is invested in your direct competitor is the one person that you may not want to ever go to at all. Having said that, if somebody seems to be investing in cloud infrastructure and they've invested in companies who are on the cloud infrastructure place, but not competitors of yours, they could present to be good options because they tend to like that sort of space. If somebody invests in a media company and you also have a media company, though not necessarily competitive with what you do, then that might be a good one for you to look at. So try to find a sweet spot. But that is not the only thing that you don't necessarily know about, because here's the thing. I think first and foremost, any equity investor is driven by the comfort level they have with the entrepreneur. Now, this does not get captured in any objective criteria, but I must say, and probably I'm being prejudiced by the fact that this is such an important criteria for me. I do not think I'm being prejudiced. I think this is true for everybody, but it is definitely true for me that if I have a discomfort, my fear tends to be, and listen to this carefully, my fear tends to be that A, there's always this big risk that the company will not grow or perform in the way that I thought it would. But B, and this makes it much worse, that what if the company performs well and I still do not make money? What if this is like a great performing story and despite that I don't make an exit? That is really pathetic, isn't it? I bore the risk worked out in my favor, The company did well. It now has great traction, customers, users, revenue, what have you, and still I'm not making money. Now, this is where if the investor feels that we will be able to develop a rapport with the entrepreneur who will then help us navigate this entire journey, who will then help us go ahead and find an exit and maintain a good relationship with us, I think that is where I have talked to any investors at least, and they have said, you know what, I really don't care about how great this company's plan is, etc., because this entrepreneur is never going to let us make money. What does that mean? It means that we are never going to be able to work with this entrepreneur. He or she is too opportunistic and will only interested in us until that moment at which point we give him or her money. And at that point of time, when the next round comes and a very bad deal is being envisaged for earlier investors, namely me, then the entrepreneur will totally have no sense of fairness and will leave me high and dry. So that is extremely important. You need to understand, like I said here, that you need to understand what the investor was expecting you to happen as a result of your of the investment, and then when you are presenting to them, you should the roadmap that you're showing, the journey that you're showing, the milestones that you're talking about should seem like the kind which fulfill the requirement of the investor, right? There are obviously many more points that we can discuss. I have often seen situations where two different venture capitalists might have diametrically opposite views about the likelihood of success of a business. I have seen businesses which have been rejected by dozens of VCs. That means probably if they were fundraising in India, they were exhausted almost all the VCs in India, and then suddenly go to some other place, China, Croatia, or Silicon Valley, and they find that investor goes ahead and there is an investor there who is very happy to invest in them. So obviously everybody has a unique way of thinking. I think you should think of fundraising as a very difficult selling exercise. I also hope that you understand that the event of funding is an exceptional event. That means at least statistically, one out of a large number of companies which begins the journey of funding actually ever gets funded. So if your entire entrepreneurship journey was about funding, then I'm very pessimistic about how this thing is going to come out. But if your entrepreneurship journey was about creating a product or a service, coming up with something that people enjoy, love, and want to pay money to get, I think you'll do well. And if not today, maybe tomorrow somebody would be willing to fund you. And if it is not a venture capitalist or even an equity investor of some sort, probably some other kind of funding would come your way. And I think that is probably the best and healthiest way to look at this. With that, you guys have been exceptionally patient, and I can only admire your patience for this. The number of people who are on the on this has only gone up. We are at about 50 to 80% more the number of people than when we started out with. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to taking your questions if you have any. Apparently I have a poll going on here, so you guys can think about whether it was excellent, good, average, below average, or poor, and go ahead and do it. They are not allowing me to rate myself, otherwise I would have done that too. Go ahead and finish your poll, and at that point of time we will do a little Q&A. I will request the organizer to come in with certain questions. If we are lucky that all your questions have been answered and there is no question at all, in that case the organizers can ask some questions, or I can come up with some questions that people usually tend to ask in this situation. But it would be fantastic if the audience, the couple of dozen people who are online right now, are going to go ahead and ask those questions. I'll be very, very happy to respond to you. Over to you, good folks at the National Entrepreneurship Network, which I think is absolutely fabulous. I'm very happy to have you guys here and help you in any which way I can.
Thank you, Ajeet. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I have a lot of questions pouring in, and I am just going to take one at a time, and hopefully we just can sum up as early as possible on those. So first question I'm going to take from Sandeep Kumar. What are the few books that you recommend on reading the basics of venture capital or investing for a rookie to learn more about the nuances and technical stuffs of the fundraising process?
Okay, so here's the thing. You want to basically get better at it and you want to read more stuff. I appreciate that. The thing is that unlike, let's say, if you wanted to understand investment or how bank rates work, etc., I would recommend a book on macroeconomics to you. I think that I don't have a book in mind, though I'm sure there are a couple of elements that I would request you and encourage you online. You could actually go to some of the resources that are available online. That's not the only thing. You could also go and read local news publications which specialize in the startup space, such as yourstory.com, vccircle.com, ink42.com. There are certain international ones who operate pretty intensively in the Indian area, such as E27, that is E27.com, there is techinasia.com, and I personally read all of these and I'm very interested in them. Sometimes, especially if you're in the early stages, you will find there are words that are being used which you don't understand. So for example, suppose I'll just give you a very advanced one, that there's a discussion around term sheets and somebody talks about how there is this thing called the drag along clause or the weighted average ratchet or something which you find bizarre. That would be a good term to Google. In fact, if I look at my earliest days of angel investing, and I wanted to find out about all of this, I spent hours, in fact, sometimes whole nights reading about stuff. And I would find myself ending up on websites such as investopedia.com to read definitions. I would find myself reading sample agreements, sample documents, so that when I am faced with those documents, I find myself equipped to respond to the things that I would want to see in them. But yeah, that is so I appreciate the fact that you want to learn. Uh, I didn't learn from books, so I'm not able to list any, but I read these online websites, publications, and I read them all the time. As in, I read them for days, weeks. I stayed up nights, like I said, and I did okay. So I hope you will do.
Thanks, Ajit. Next question from Gaurav Parashar. He says, Exam Bazaar is a coaching class discovery and discounting platform based in Jaipur. We are currently bootstrapped and do try to speak to the VCs over phone or Skype and utilize every opportunity we get. Do you have any thoughts around staying actively connected with VCs and other investors while sitting in a non-active city like Jaipur?
So there are really three questions. One is about your business, second is about being in touch with VCs, and third is about the Jaipur question. Different questions are of different level of difficulty. So let me begin with the third one because that's probably the easiest to respond to. Usually, somebody conducting a webinar of the type that I'm conducting needs to come and say, no, it doesn't matter where you are located. If you're a good business, people will want to invest in you. That is the politically correct thing to say. But if it were actually true, then why is it that three cities in India, Bombay, Bangalore, and Delhi, why do these three cities account for like what 80–90% of all the fundings that happen? There are like dozens and hundreds of other cities. In fact, even major cities, there is Chennai, there is Hyderabad, there is Pune, there is Kolkata, and then we start listing the Indores of the world, and I'm sure we'll reach Jaipur also. Why is it that the number of fundings happening there are very low? The fact is that venture capital, the business of venture capital, is also a very difficult business. I know that the impression of a venture capitalist who just has all this money and sits and plays God and becomes a judge and throws money in one direction or the other, which sometimes I would say even the media has helped create, it's not actually true. What is happening is that these guys have to work very hard, and if somebody is located pretty remotely, it becomes a little tougher to do things like due diligence, set up meetings, etc. It is pretty much like, think about it this way. Suppose there is a restaurant in your locality which is fabulous, but there is another restaurant which is better, but it's 100 kilometers away. The likelihood that you will as easily go 100 kilometers away is not as high. I don't want to discourage you, and luckily in today's age of communication, Skype, phone calls, online sessions, distant methods of initiating relationships. Of course, once a relationship is initiated and then you feel that more discussions have to be done, I'm sure that neither will the VC have a problem coming down to your place, nor will you have a problem going to the VC, right? So I think that it is not a serious handicap. The bigger handicap might be that had you been in, let's say, a city like Mumbai, which is where I am located, or more so Bangalore and Delhi, probably you would have been running into these venture capitalists. Probably you would have been meeting them and developing a sort of informal relation with them, which you may not get. But you also have advantages, right? So I know businesses that are in Indore, I know businesses that are in Jaipur. I'm an investor in a business that is in Indore, and there are certain advantages you have in terms of real estate pricing, in terms of employee cost being much lower, etc. So there are always going to be pros and cons. I don't think that even if there is a con, it is so severe that it should destroy your business or lead you to not getting funded. As far as that thing about you keeping in touch with VCs is concerned, I find it a little odd. If there is a specific VC who periodically is getting onto phone calls with you, this can only mean one of two things. Either you're at a very advanced stage of discussion that they're giving all that time and attention to you, given that, like I said, pretty much like your business, even the VC business is a difficult business. Or you are really talking to somebody very, very junior who is just keeping you warm. No harm in that, but make sure that your expectations of what will come up in such a situation is a little realistic, and it's not as if because they've talked to you 3 times that they're about to fund you, right? I think, and this is my general advice to people, that you should approach a venture capitalist where you think that you're either ready or more or less ready to get funded. If you approach them early, present to them, and they say, oh, this is too early for us, and then you go again a little later, and then you say, oh, you know what, we were at 1, now we're at 2 or 3. I think it is wasting everybody's time. And at least when I used to angel invest very actively, when I would kind of have rejected the company, it was a rare situation that they could come back to me with a substantial change or improvement such that I would now decide to invest in them. I'm thinking hard about whether that ever happened at all, and frankly I can neither think of that for an angel investment I had done, or even I would go so far as to say, if a company came to me and say, I want you to be my mentor, even there, if I kind of rejected them, in my experience, and my experience need not be applicable to everybody, but my experience, there has not been even one company where people then went back and came back to me like 2 months later or 10 months later with something so fundamentally different that I said, okay, now I'll be your mentor, though earlier I had decided not to be. Having said that, you must know that there are no rules. When I'm saying these things, I'm sharing experiences, or worse, I'm sharing my thoughts. There are no rules. Do what logically seems right to you at that point of time, and it might just be the best thing that you could do.
Thanks, Ajeet. Taking up a question from Prem Kumar. What are the key things VCs look for in a business model? Maybe we will just do very quick answers for all these questions, because quite a lot of questions are poured in.
Sounds good. So see, primarily, I think that because VCs have to, typically if you take money from a VC, let's say it's the first time you took money from a VC, you will take money again and again, which means it's a slippery slope of sequential fundraising. So why would you be funded sequentially? Because your business is growing a lot, which means the first VC gave you money and you became 10x. If the second VC gives you money only if you can become 10x, now you're 100x compared to the first time. And if that happens and the third VC gives you money again with the belief that you'll be 10x, you're going to be 1000x. Does the business model have capacity to become that big? Is there a market size which the VC believes? See, entrepreneurs tend to have very optimistic views about their market size because they think everybody in the world should buy whatever that they're selling. Just like I'm drinking water right now. So does that mean that making mineral water, bottled water is the best business because every human being is going to consume it? While the market size for water might be the world, for bottled water might be 1/10 of the, or 1/20th of the world, but the addressable market by you might be so minuscule because you don't have the resources to go after the entire market. Your addressable market is going to be very small. So your model is dependent on whether you have a solution to a large enough problem, whether your solution is not just better but substantially better. I think this is what we all miss. A lot of us come up with solutions just slightly better. Like it could be as little as something is selling here but is not available here, so I will sell it here. Sure, for a short period that might be an advantage, but soon everybody will sell this here. So I think that the advantage or the quality of your solution has to be substantially superior if you want to be in a situation where people will want to fund you. There are a lot more that you can respond to. Frankly, every question is so good that I could do a 1 hour on every question, and that's not going to happen. So I'll try to take some more questions in and try to remain at the significant point of the response. So let's go to the next question.
Srinivas Mishra writes, can you explain me about pre-money, post-money, and how to do company valuation?
Pre-money, post-money, I'll explain to you in 1 minute. Company evaluation, I will take about 10 to 20 hours to do. So hence I'll just give you an overview of it. Usually decide that your company today is worth 10 crore rupees. Let's take smaller numbers. Your company today is worth 100 rupees. Based on this 100 rupee valuation, I decide that I, the venture capitalist, am going to give you 10 rupees as an investment. Now, before the time I funded you, your company, both of us agreed was worth 100 rupees. Then I gave you 10 rupees. Now, what is the worth of your company? Nothing changed. So that 100 rupees remain 100 rupees, but you also have 10 rupees, which I have given you. So your company is now worth 110 rupees. So your pre-money valuation was 100 rupees and your post-money valuation is 110 rupees. It is as simple as that. Frankly, a very difficult topic. In reality, the only answer that is correct is the valuation at which the seller is willing to sell and the buyer is willing to buy. When that it becomes the same, that is the true valuation, because it is determined by the demand and supply. However, valuations have been brought about in a wide variety of ways. People have tried to use discounted cash flow, which is a classic model of valuation and has worked in certain kinds of industries for certain periods of time. There are people who try to do comparables, namely, I have so much traction. This company, when it had the same traction, was valued at this recently, so mine must be the same, etc. Some others could value it based on, I will become that in 3 years. So when I calculate backwards, I should be worth this today, etc. But this is a very, very deep topic. I was asked for references of books in the first question. Here's the thing. If you really want to get into the depth of understanding the nuances of valuation, there is a very, very a seminal book, a book that probably is the best one in this space. It is called Valuation by Damodaran. So Damodaran is this Indian origin guy, currently teaches at the NYU, New York University. The book will be fairly dense and difficult for people to understand who don't have a background in economics/finance. So don't bother about reading it unless you really want to get into the depth of it. Otherwise, try to understand how every transaction that you see, how the valuation might have been brought about, and how that valuation relates to underlying factors such as age, background of founders, traction, revenue, profit, or what have you, and see if you can see some patterns.
Thanks, Ajeet. Next question from Manish Sao. He writes, we are building an AI-enabled omnichannel platform for talents like musicians, comics, chefs, designers, etc. across verticals to work and distribute their services, events, and content. We have made significant progress in the venture in the last 1 year plus. Should we approach angels or VCs at this point of time?
So see, look at it this way. The thought process that angels as well as VCs possess is not very dissimilar. Angels tend to come in a little earlier. Angels use their own money, and as a consequence can make individual decisions. Angels come in so far before the time that they are going to exit that they often are not seeing a clear road to exit yet. It's not that the VCs can see it, but VCs are a little more conscious of it, I have found in my experience. So based on what you told me about your platform for talent as well as for showcasing their content, it is very difficult to say who would be the right people. Today, there are micro VCs who sometimes are entering at not just at the same stage and level at which angels enter, sometimes even sooner. So if you're looking to raise something like in Indian rupees, 25 lakhs, 50 lakhs, 1 crore, or a little more, I think that you could be looking at a situation where angel investors are the right ones for you. If your traction is just some initial traction, however attractive, probably once again it's a case for angel investing, but there really are no rules. I've seen micro VCs entering at giving 25 lakhs and 50 lakh investments also. So I think that if I knew much more about what you're doing, I could give you a slightly better response. But I think based on what you have told me, seems like a case for angel investment.
Next question from Jyotishman Goswami. Does VCs prefer product-based startups more than service-based startups?
So VCs prefer profitable startups where they're going to make a lot of money. Obvious, right? Now, let us see how obvious it is to respond to your question of product versus service. Usually it is found, and there could be exceptions, okay, like Infosys is a great example of a service company which grew and became a world beater, and I'm sure the early investors who purchased Infosys stock, even in its public issue, its IPO, made tons of money. And imagine if you were an investor much before that, what would have happened to you. But in general, we have found that if product companies do well, of course there's a big if product companies do well, their scale up, their ramp up in numbers, profit, sales can be dramatically faster than a services company. As a result, though VCs really want to make a return on investment, but the ratio of product company and service company is extremely heavily skewed in the favor of product companies, which is not to say that service companies can't be invested in. But what I have found is that for a services company to be invested in, they need to have significantly higher traction growth. Sometimes I would even say the age and vintage of the company. And at that point of time, private equity investors, later stage investors are happy to invest into them. But if you go out with a plan and say, I will set up a company that make apps for people, put venture capital into me, you're going to be finding it extremely difficult, right? So yes, as in though I have seen cases of services companies being funded, I have seen services company which start productizing their service, which is the bridge between those two ends. But yeah, largely it is product companies that get funded. I must clarify here that product companies does not necessarily mean what some of us might intuitively think as a product, namely a physical product, like a cable or a power bank. Well, these are definitely physical hardware products, but products could very well be software products or some other kinds of products.
Ansel Furtado wants to know from you your perspective on would the barrier of VC's flow of funds, either in seed funding or gaining equity later, lead to more debt from macroeconomic point of view as for the situation of startup sustainability due to increased competition in the similar fields or industry, in understanding having similar startups gaining investment from various different investors across the different geographies?
Yes. Now, I know that one word answer did not convey, but frankly, your question was too complex.
Yes.
Okay, which is why Sulakshana was reading it out, hoping that though she has not fully understood the question, once she reads it out to me, I will fully understand it. And guess what? I did not.
Yes.
So you know what, Ansel, I'm so sorry, as I did pick up some of the stuff that you're saying, and I got an idea that it was a very nice analytical question. Quite unfortunately, I'm not getting what you're asking. So we'll move to the next question.
Okay. So the next question is from Lazarus Dias. How does an entrepreneur value his business and decide how much equity to dilute? How much money he gets versus how much equity he dilutes?
Okay. So see, here's the thing. A moment ago, I did talk of valuation. Since this question has come again, I'll view it in an entirely different way. So earlier, I told you that valuation is basically the number at which transaction happens, and that's only fair valuation, though there might be some mechanisms and processes to come up with it. Now let me take a very different view, since this is question number 2 on the same topic. I think that if you look at 3 variables, how much money did you raise, how much equity did you give away, and what is your valuation? So for instance, if you raised 1 crore rupees, and at the end of it, the post money, as I had described, the shareholder has 10%, that means your value at the end of this was 10 crore rupees, because 1 crore is 10% of 10 crore. So there are these 3 numbers which are interrelated. Likewise, I could say you raise 1 crore rupee at a 10 crore rupee post money valuation. Hence, you can compute that since 1 crore is 10% of 10 crore, you have got a 10% dilution. I think that instead of getting into this algebra and arithmetic behind it, let's try to stay a little logical. Try to find out that if you want to grow substantially, what does substantially mean? 10 times, 20 times, more than that. If you want to grow that much in a short period of time, how much is a short period? 9 to 18 months. Again, see, all these numbers are example numbers, okay? You decide your own numbers. So let's say you want to grow 10x in a period of 1 year. How much money will that take? So let us say you decide it's going to take me 50 lakh rupees. So that is the amount you're going to raise. So this number has now been arrived at. Now, this number, namely, what will be the percentage you'll give? well, you will try to give as less as possible, right? Of course, overinflating your valuation in earlier days can actually lead to negative outcomes where later you won't be able to sell even at that price just because you found, let us say, a very, very sympathetic investor earlier. But largely, your impression would be to lower the amount of equity you give. That means enhance your valuation. So that is it. I think that the fundamental thing you should focus on is what do you want to do with the money, and how much money will you need to achieve what you want to do with the money. Then try to get a good valuation, try to get a good percentage. This really is how you go about it. If you say, you know what, I want a $1 million valuation or 100 crore valuation, what good is that number if it doesn't achieve the purposes or doesn't give you the amount of money? Just as an example, suppose I give you 1 rupee today, and I say in return give me 0.00001% of your company. You probably are at a 10,000 crore valuation, but was there any of that of any use to you? I think not. So I think that focus more on what you're going to use the money for, and then go out and get a valuation as close to what you think you would want to get. That might be the best approach.
We can have another maybe 2 or 3 questions. So this is from Karthik Karpate. He asks how to validate the idea and valuation of it, and how to get to investor.
Okay, so there are all these accelerator programs. There are all of these programs which help you think through your idea. Probably even some of them may help you validate it. It depends on what stage you're at. In my case, when I would invest, or at least in the later years of my investment, where I thought I was a little smarter as an investor than I was in some of my earlier years, I found that the only idea validation that I would accept was really customers buying your product. Going and doing a market research, making a prototype and showing it to 20 people and seeing how they react, etc. I found that anything short of actual sales was very artificial, and trying to convert learnings from that validation into trying to predict whether this is the investable business, I thought was not smart. Of course, when you're talking of venture capitalists, they tend to come a little later than angel investors, except if they are seed venture capitalists, etc. So by that time, I expect you would have some significant traction, or you would have some traction at least. So the idea validation would largely have happened. The scale validation and team validation and all will of course remain to be done. But I think that nothing can beat the proof of the pudding, which is in the eating. Namely, go out and do business. Don't wait until your product is the absolute perfect final product. Of course, you have heard of the concept of an MVP, which is a minimum viable product. Everybody knows what product means. Everybody knows what minimum means. It is a viable where we don't spend enough time. A viable product, at least in its minimal form, is one wherein it has the characteristics, the features, and the value and the position that the final large product will have, but it doesn't have absolutely all the features. It doesn't have all the nuances, all the flexibilities, etc. So it should still be philosophically in the same category as the solution that you're coming up with, but it may be a much scaled down version of it. Go online, you can see the MVPs or early models of several products, such as, for example, if you use Twitter, you can see what Twitter looked like when it first went to investors, and there are other such examples online. Those will be very valuable. But I think that today raising funds has become so complex, or at least competitive, that there probably is a requirement to demonstrate nothing short of actual traction as a method of idea validation. So we are at 3 minutes beyond 5 o'clock. This has been absolutely phenomenal, and the number of people have been very attractive to us. I think we will take one last question and call it a day for today. Thank you very much for all of you for being here. So Lakshana, let's take one last question, and then we will end this.
So this is a question from Evan K. He asked, as a beginner to investing, how VCs differ from other investors like angel investors?
Okay, so there was a time when angel investors would enter first. They would make smaller bets, and they would come even when the idea may not have been proven. Then they would handhold the companies, hopefully get them VC funded later. That has changed. Today there are VCs who are coming in very early as angel investors, or if not sooner. There are angel investors who are making bigger and bigger bets. So for instance, not very long ago, I think probably a little over a year ago, there was a company, Momo's company, which got invested at a valuation of 100 crores by angel investors, which to the best of my knowledge was the biggest valuation that angel investors ever gave in their first round of investment. So the boundaries have been blurred. Though the boundaries may have been blurred from the point of view of when these guys invest and how much money they invest, there are still some boundaries, and the most critical one of them is that angel investors typically are investing their own money, while venture capitalists are investing their investors' money. And as a consequence, the decision-making process tends to be different. Also, since venture capitalists come a little later and they are professional venture capitalists, there are close to no professional angel investors, though there are some. I used to be one for a couple of years. For that purpose, often the requirements that a venture capitalist has might be a little more rigid than what an angel investor has. Especially as a category, there might be some angel investor or the other who will like some idea, while venture capitalists might be so caught up about whether this can scale to a point where a much later stage VC would still invest in it, that they may not like that idea at all. Which is why I always worry that a lot of businesses that are getting angel funded actually might be inherently non-fundable businesses, but the angels do not realize it, and hence no VC touches them, and this leads to very, very sad outcomes. Because with the little money, whatever the money was that angels gave the the entrepreneur rushes ahead and grows to a certain size, and then they don't find the support because the angels can't give them the high volume of money that they wanted, and the VCs don't find this a fundable model, and that leads to fairly sad outcomes. So make sure that these are some of the things that you understand before you choose who to talk to. With that, Sudakshana, I would invite you to, try to wind this up.
Sure.
It has been absolutely fabulous talking to all of you. Some of you have sat through almost a complete hour or a few minutes more than the hour for this session, and I must say I admire that.
On that note, concluding this webinar on what you don't know about the way VCs think, now we definitely know. It was a pleasure having the webinar session with Ajeet. I truly appreciate the way you covered each and every topic in detail and also cleared our doubts on the same. I would like to express my appreciation to the participants on behalf of WFNEN for your dedicated participation on the webinar. I'm sure you had a great session. Check back the webinar link on the website to get the recorded version for self-learning and access the presentation anytime. You can also connect with the speaker who is also a mentor on www.wfnen.org. We would be having another webinar series shortly and would like to bring to you another enriching experience. Wish you success in your endeavor. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ajeet sir.
Thank you very much.